and it works. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
we got
Okay.
we got the technology.
Yeah.
So now we just need to get all the other things in check, right? We
Yeah.
got the technology. Yeah.
Well, the day has finally arrived.
Yeah. Are you following the COP26 a little bit, or?
Yes, some. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's
it's a lot of talk, right? Not much palatable results.
right. Yeah, I guess the most encouraging thing was the 100,000 people in the street there. That's quite impressive. But
That's true. Yeah.
but yeah, but they're still talking way too gradual um, uh, strategies. It's just they're in denial.
Yeah, so that's what needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we did talk a little bit about, the bright green lies that I read, right? That book.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still, if you have time, I would recommend it because it's really a
Hmm.
good deconstruction of the myth that
Yeah.
all those shiny things can
Yeah.
do the trick, especially if you really factor in the mining and all the
Right. Yeah.
damage that's needed
Hmm.
to get up to par.
Hmm.
And I think, there's really the IPCC mentioned lifestyle changes a while ago, but now you
Yeah.
don't hear so much about that anymore. It seems to be that just policies and technology will solve everything.
Right. And way too much weight now being put on these so-called negative emissions technologies, which are not going to work either,
Yes,
and
yes,
cause even more problems.
yes. Well, I thought immediately this is a new cash avenue, right? That they already start building.
Yeah.
Uh, because the other things, right? If people consume less, that's loss for them, right? That's loss in revenue,
Right.
and then when you even think about telling people they should take overpopulation seriously, who's going to buy more products if we are less people? Right? Can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that was once like a religious thing about, people saying we can't control our own fertility. That's like, God's
Mhm.
decision or something.
Yeah. Right.
But now it's basically really the markets are based on ever growing consumption. So if we are less people, then we can't
Mhm.
they can't make enough business, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you see 8 billion? What is it called actually? 8 billion miracles? I'm not sure. It's about overpopulation and overconsumption.
Mhm.
It's a new
No,
film.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's pretty
Mhm.
good. I showed that on as one of the documentaries this year that I
Mhm.
show. I always have a documentary series every semester.
Yeah.
Um, Is it 8? This kind of bugs me. We have enough time. I'm quickly checking
Mhm.
my schedule so I can tell you the exact name of it. Uh,
Okay.
so,
Uh, by the
okay,
way,
so
your image is frozen, but I guess
oh,
that doesn't isn't too critical. If is mine okay? Okay, now you just moved.
yeah, yours is visible. It's a little blurry at times, but it's
Mm,
moving. It never
okay.
really. stand still.
Yeah.
Another thing, do you have the share button, that up arrow next to the red?
Yes, it's
Okay,
right there. Yeah.
good, very good. So we're set up for that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's called, actually, I found it, 8 Billion Angels.
Okay, so you were right.
Yeah, miracles. Yeah, actually, interesting story is when I was teaching high school in 2008 or so, uh, I saw a sticker, and it's like a stork, and it says 6 billion miracles is enough. And now, right, we have 2021, and we are 8 billion
Right.
angels, right?
Yeah.
The story is still the same, but we
Yeah.
added 2 billion to the
Right.
equation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Good. So I don't see the total number of, let's see, maybe if I go on the attendee list here, participants. Yeah, it still doesn't give me a total. We're quite a few people. That's good.
Mhm.
And we're officially starting in 7 minutes.
Right.
So good. Let's see. Does it actually allow? We both can't say that, but I think I did allow reactions, like raise hand and thumbs up and stuff, because I think it's nice for you to get some kind of feedback. It's not too
Right.
too much disturbance. And I also enabled the chat function, which I've seen today. Quite a few people had that disabled in their presentations.
Mhm.
And for me, this is a way to also manage the discussion afterwards, because I will look through that thread.
Yeah.
And then ask you the questions
Okay.
that people have. I also they somehow sent me 2 copies of your book.
Oh.
So I have actually one out there for a lottery between the attendees. So there should be an option to get a list later for the attendees, and then I originally wanted to do only students in that group, but I can't identify them actually too easy.
Yeah.
It doesn't say student or faculty
Yeah.
or whatever on it, so they're probably not going to be practical
Yeah.
unless I go from the top, and if I randomize the list, that's what I usually do.
Yeah.
And then I ask that person, the first person, are you a student? No, then I go to the next.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Something
You could do
like
that.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, we're still having 5 minutes, so I'm just gonna use it for asking you something. What do you make out of that infrastructure bill that passed without, of course, all the Build Back Better, right, provisions?
Right. It, it was just a kind of classic highway and bridge bill, but fortunately they did include um, a lot of funds for replacing the aging water systems in places, especially low-income areas of large cities where, with Detroit being the worst example, where they don't have drinkable water anymore. And then there's some stuff in there for new electricity grid and and so forth. But a lot of what's needed is in this other bill that they're still working on.
Yeah, which it's not off the table, but right, whether there will be a majority.
Yeah. Well, it almost certainly will pass. The question is, how much are they going to have to cut out of it to get it to pass?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a pity. So much invested interest, right, in the fossil fuels still.
Right.
Yeah, they had this. What is the group? I didn't really know them. They scanned screened the names of the invited participants of the COP26, and then came out that the largest group of people are the fossil fuel lobbyists, right? With more than 500.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, more than 500 invited participants, and they only included those that had really close ties, not just like marginally being connected to them. And then of course some of the things they present on or they are lobbying for is like the hydrogen economy, right? So they're actually transitioning in the technology, but they're not really transitioning in the way business is run.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting closer here.
Yeah.
Want to make sure that don't have any disturbances. So I will quickly introduce you, telling the people also what the Issa series, speaker series is, and then I will hand over to you, and you have the field, and we will do the discussion as long as you have time and as long as questions come. So, like 15 minutes, hopefully we have enough questions for 15 minutes. I've attended a few sessions, and in some of them, participation was a little lower than. Okay, so it went up. I think that's how I could see. I see 5 people with bubbles, and then it says about 50 more people. So it looks like people are going to join us now. But there was a rotating lunchtime in this whole event series, so it's kind of a little challenging. It's supposed to end by 1, but a little bit later than our session is scheduled. Okay, so we're almost there. Is my picture still frequently frozen, or?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Hopefully not everywhere. Maybe it's the long line to Kansas here. Okay. Welcome everybody who joins our breakout session with Stan Cox, who is our Issa speaker for this semester. I want to start telling you quickly that the William Issa Endowment Speaker Series was created by Daryl and Kathy Issa in memory of their nephew, William Issa, who was a passionate supporter of environmental causes and unfortunately died very young. Stan, we are delighted to have you as this semester's Issa speaker. Stan received his PhD in plant breeding and genetics from Iowa State University in 1983. Then went on working for the US Department of Agriculture as a wheat geneticist in the 80s and 90s, before joining the Land Institute in 2000, which is based in Salina, Kansas, first as a research coordinator and now as a research scholar in ecosphere studies at TLI, the Land Institute, TLI. The Land Institute is a science-based research organization working on alternatives to destructive agriculture practices, such as advancing perennial grain crops and polyculture farming. So the alternative to monoculture farming, which we know has a lot of bad outcomes. Stan is a very active writer. His books include The Path to a Livable Future. We will hear a lot about his latest book, Forging a New Politics to Fight Climate Change, Racism, and the Next Pandemic. Last year, Stan published The Green New Deal and Beyond, Ending the Climate Emergency While We Still Can, which continues pretty much, I'm sure, into your new book. And then Any Way You Slice It, The Past, Present, and Future of Rationing, which is something we have to be prepared to do. And it's, of course, an inconvenient truth to restrict ourselves. And then Losing Our Cool, Uncomfortable Truths About Our Air-Conditioned World, which is another thing, right, with the heat waves. We need to cool, but if we cool the way we do now, we make it worse. Stan also frequently writes essays in economic and political, on the economic and political roots of the global ecological crisis, and those essays appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, the New Republic, and the Guardian, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, send a warm virtual welcome to Stan Cox.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Tom, for that. And it's great to sort of be with you. I wish we could all be in the same room, but I think we can still have a good discussion. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and especially because we find ourselves here today right in the middle of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, which started out with some very stirring declarations of urgency by world leaders and how we face an existential crisis, and we have to do everything we can to prevent the worst predictions from coming true of several degrees of warming during this century. And then those have been followed up by very weak pledges of action on reducing emissions, and the actual strategies that countries are proposing to follow to meet those, even those weak emissions pledges are even weaker. So it's every one of these COP meetings is always disappointing, and one doesn't really expect too much out of them. But anyway, what I'm want to talk about today is what would it look like if countries do decide that they are going to take effective action, and with the accelerating rate and intensity of climatic emergencies, maybe something will shock them into action, or maybe the 100,000 people who are in the street in Glasgow, which is the most encouraging thing about the meeting. in the year 2020, I became encouraged because the collective consciousness seems to have finally been penetrating, that there seemed to be a surging awareness, not only that, especially here in this country, that our healthcare economy is totally dysfunctional, which was, of course, the pandemic revealed that, but it also unmasked the degree of economic inequity, the lack of workers' rights, the fragility of our food system. Systemic racism, of course, was the headline issue of the year. And of course, the climate emergency. We went all the way through the entire alphabet's worth of hurricanes, and even used up half the Greek alphabet. And then the most dramatic yet climatic disasters in this country, which are the wildfires of the past couple of years. But my optimism about awareness being heightened was misplaced, and no effective action has been taken on any of these issues in Washington, and certainly not in the corporate world. The chief hole that is at the right in the middle of all current plans regarding climate plans and policies is the lack of any mechanism for directly driving fossil fuel use down to zero quickly. All of the suggestions, even carbon taxes and so forth, are not. It's too late for those. If it were 1990, then we'd have a range of options. Now it has to be mandatory, rapid phase out of fossil fuels. Of course, the reason that the leaders in Glasgow and the leaders in Washington aren't doing that is because they're wanting to keep economic growth going. And whereas the pandemic temporarily interrupted growth quite dramatically, growth has been restored quickly. A fossil fuel phase out will put a long-term squeeze on growth, and that's why that's being resisted. Of course, the whole, all the way through 2020 and now through this year, the goal has been articulated as we have to be getting back to normal, meaning restore the very economy that was has been the source of the problem, both with COVID and with climate. That is excess production, unrestrained consumption, economic exploitation, unequal protection under the law, and all of that to produce growth, the benefits of which go entirely to the upper 1/3 approximately of wealth and income, the households in that upper 1/3. And the higher you go up toward the 1% and into the 1%, the benefits increase as you go up the income scale. And the results of that growth, both the economic, the health results, and especially the ecological impacts, including both climate and local pollution. Most those impacts are, they hit marginalized communities the hardest. In fact, in 2020, in that 1 year, life expectancy decreased by 9 months in the white population of the US, 9 months. Almost 2 years in the Latino population, and by almost 3 years in the Black population. 3-year drop in life expectancy. and with climate, also the low-income areas of our large cities, places where there's a lack of green space, there's much more paved area, concrete and asphalt. A study came out during 2020 showing that during the summer, and especially during the terrible heat waves we've had the past couple of summers, that those areas are 5 to 12 degrees hotter in the summer than other residential areas, with a consequent higher rate of heat deaths. Heat waves being the deadliest of all on a numerical basis, more people killed by heat waves than any other natural disasters. Now I'm going to try the old share the screen. Let's see. Well, what's it doing here? Choose what to.
Yeah, it looks like might have shared your team screen. So you need to pick your PowerPoint. I think window actually is better when you go to share and then Windows, and then pick that window.
Oh, PowerPoint. Oh, well,
So you did you select your PowerPoint and it doesn't come up?
Let's see. Sorry. Oh. Okay, here we go. Sorry for the delay there.
Okay.
I should have practiced. Now, you may have seen this graph before. It was put out originally by Oxfam, showing that half of all carbon dioxide emissions produced by humans are produced by the richest 10% of humans globally, and the poorest 50% have pretty negligible emissions. And so what that means is that in trying to tackle climate change, that that pretty much all of the reduction is going to have to happen among the world's 20 to 30% richest populations. And that means most of the people of the United States, with, however, we have a significant number of people living, of course, in poverty, and they are they produce far fewer emissions. Now, just to as one illustration, and very kind of a micro level of how all these crises we face interact with each other, let's consider what I call the COVID climate equity air conditioning feedback loop. And this is intentionally a confusing slide, but because this loop is quite complicated. But in the past 2 summers, we've had these wildfire events in the West. And one impact, well, those wildfires, their impacts can be severely worsened by interaction with the coronavirus, because the particulate matter in the smoke from the wildfires has an impact on the lung cells, and it makes them more vulnerable to invasion by the coronavirus. So it's been shown now in the course of the pandemic that ample outdoor air, that is, when you're indoors, having all doors and windows open, exhaust fans going, or even better, being outdoors is one of the best protections for the virus. On the other hand, though, in these cases of heat waves or smoke emergencies, air conditioning is necessary, which, of course, does not allow ample outdoor ventilation. And we saw many cases of faster viral spread because of that. And so then you've got more coronavirus circulating. We have these surges, and people who could afford it in California and the Northwest they were traveling, going to places that had lower case counts of coronavirus and did not have wildfires going on. Hawaii was one of the favorite ones. And so they reached safety from both coronavirus and the smoke. People who could not afford to travel had to shelter in place, and they were then they were just stuck with the health and safety hazards. But of course, the travel that the wealthy people engaged in was producing more greenhouse emissions, which will mean in the future that travel will generate hotter conditions and more wildfires, and then more heat waves and smoke, which will require more air conditioning, which will produce more greenhouse emissions, and that continues in a cycle. To do something about climate, it is absolutely essential to get to end fossil fuel emissions. This is a graph of the increasing total emissions since 1990. The orange area is, yes.
Then I still see your first slide.
What?
It did not go on. Maybe you are on presentation mode, but we actually see the screen of your PowerPoint. So you have to share that window.
Okay, I'll just
okay. Yeah. Now.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I don't know why it wasn't didn't go into slideshow. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay, the orange area represents the emissions from fossil fuels as they've increased over time. The emissions of CO2 clearly making up the bulk of the emissions, and so we have no choice but to get that under control. If we make all the other changes we need to do, we're not going to solve the problem. The dark blue or purplish area is methane, and a large share of those emissions are also from fossil fuels, natural gas. So fossil fuels are the key to doing something about climate. Now, there's a kind of an unspoken or an often openly expressed assumption in by climate leaders and climate activists that all we have to do is build at a breakneck speed, build renewable energy capacity, primarily wind and solar, and through the magic of the market, that will suppress the quantity and displace the quantities of fossil fuels, joule for joule or kilowatt for kilowatt, so that the energy system will be transformed simply by technological means, by building more wind and solar. History tells us something different. This is the history of energy use in the world since 1800, and clearly oil, coal, and gas have all increased in lockstep. When oil came along in a big way in the early 20th century, it did not displace coal. Coal use continued to rise. And when natural gas came along after World War II, it didn't displace oil. Oil kept increasing. New sources of energy tend to simply add to the total energy supply because everybody wants more energy in a growing economy rather than displacing. And then you see in the past decade, wind and solar have not, this small increase in those has not displaced the fossil fuels either. So what can we do? Because this is this is that past oil, gas, and coal going up, and it has to go down at a breakneck speed. It's like making a U-turn in a big tanker truck at 80 miles an hour on the interstate. We got to decline very rapidly, and as I was saying, the buildup of renewable energy isn't going to accomplish that. What I've been and others have been advocating is that there has to be a statutory, mandatory cap on the number of barrels of oil, cubic feet of gas, tons of coal that can come out of the economy and into the, or come out of the ground and into the economy. And that cap has to decline rapidly year by year to a deadline, and the deadline is getting closer all the time. We can say 2035 at the latest. Now, that loss of fossil fuels to the economy will only partially be replaced by this green area, the renewable energy that's coming online for a lot of technical reasons, a lot of environmental reasons, and the big problem of the metal resources that have to go into it. And so I don't know, this is, these are drawn at an unknown slope here, but it's going to be partial. And even once we've gotten rid of the fossil fuels, the buildup may continue for a number of years, but we're not going to get back up to our original level of energy availability, which is not necessarily a disaster. We already use way too much energy, and we need to shrink down to the level of a lot of other countries that use half to a quarter as much energy as we do, and are doing fine. This whole thing, my colleague and I have called it cap and adapt. So what I was talking about was the cap part, in which we drive use of fossil fuels down to zero. But what that's going to trigger the necessity for, first of all, allocating resources, especially these energy resources, where they can meet human needs and provide essential goods and services, and not be used for wasteful or superfluous production, because there won't be enough energy to continue doing everything we're doing now with energy. And so, for example, there's probably going to be a deep reduction in in the manufacture of personal vehicles, and devote more and more of the energy toward building up public transportation systems, as one example. As Tom mentioned, the other thing that become necessary will probably be rationing of energy at the consumer level. There's often a misunderstanding of rationing. Rationing is not the method of reducing consumption. It's not the way that the government forces you to consume less, because what reduces what's being reduced is the amount of the quantity of energy coming into the economy, and then rationing is an adaptation to that, to ensure fairness and to ensure sufficiency for everybody. So as was done during World War II, everyone is guaranteed a certain quantity of energy, a sufficient amount to do what they need to do, but no one is allowed to consume it excessively. Okay, I'll because I think time has come to wrap up the presentation. I'm sorry for the technical glitches, but I'm ready to have some discussion with you all about any of these things. Have I shown up on the screen again?
No, it's actually the bubbles. I don't. Did you close your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, here you are back.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. We do have at least 15 minutes on for questions. If anybody has a question, please type it into the chat. I have allowed the chat window here in this section for this presentation. You can also, I'm not sure whether I can individually unmute, but if you raise your hand, I can try that too. So let's see, chat seems to be closed, which is strange. I see it open, but then I'm a presenter. But you can raise your hand. Let's try that. Raise your hand if you have a question, and I will see that I can unmute you. Yeah, I'm okay. Good. So Hannah, I've seen you here, so I allow you to use your mic. Hannah, you can ask a question. Okay, so let me look here again. You need to, okay, Hannah, I allowed you to unmute yourself.
Okay, it's working now.
Okay.
So as college students, how do you think that we could help with fighting the use of the overuse of fossil fuels and combating climate change?
Well, excellent question, and there's always a discussion going on about how personal action versus joining collective action, and both are important. But at this stage in the progress of or lack of progress in doing something about climate change, it seems to me that joining in the collective action that is going on, a lot of it led by Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, etc., is very important for those of us who don't hold political office and don't necessarily have much political influence individually. I mean, that's what was responsible, for example, for ending the Vietnam War. But that's why I was saying I was heartened by the 100,000 people in the street in Glasgow. What the reason we've even gotten to the point of having a serious discussion about a Green New Deal and these kind of things was the 5 to 6 years ago, the wave of opposition to pipelines led by the indigenous people whose lands were being threatened by that. Both the First Nations movements they fought the fossil fuel companies harder than anybody. Both their efforts and the environmental justice movement, which led by people living in low-income, primarily Black neighborhoods around the country since the 1980s, who've been fighting to keep polluting power plants and other polluting industries out of their neighborhoods. Or they provide another example of what we need to see more of.
Okay, thank you, Stan. I actually see a few questions now in the chat. Strange that it first didn't work. So I'm gonna go with one more raised hand first before I forget about that. And that is Chris. I'm allowing your mic. Chris, you have the mic. You need to unmute yourself. Okay, that doesn't seem to work. Okay, let's try that again. Yeah, so your mic is enabled, Chris. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, then we go to some of the chats that I received. In one solution, if one solution is to ration energy on the consumer level, how can we as a society equitably do that so marginalized communities are not at a disadvantage?
Right, and one, I mean, that's one of the reasons rationing is required, is to not disadvantage marginalized communities. Because the one thing I didn't mention that goes along with rationing is price controls. So that because if you have a restricted supply and high demand, or continued demand for fuels, then the inflation would take over, and they wouldn't be affordable at all to anybody of modest income or even middle income. So uh, the combination of price controls to keep energy, your electricity bill, all these things affordable, and rationing, which guarantees that you're not going to be waiting in mile-long lines at the gas station, or having blackouts of electricity because others are overusing it. It protects both the affordability and your access. It guarantees access to sufficient energy. Well, now you're muted, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Jay asked, why did you choose to be part of the Land Institute, and do you conduct much of your research in collaboration with the Institute?
So the beginning of it was, why did I come to the Land Institute?
Yes, why did you choose to be part of it, and do you conduct much of your research in collaboration?
Well, but before I came here in 2000, I'd been working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a researcher in wheat breeding, and I had kind of a working relationship on various projects with Wes Jackson, who's the founder of the Land Institute, which is about an hour's drive away from Kansas State University, where I was working. And it became clear to me that we were not using the standard annual crops like wheat, which I was working on, which are annuals, which means that they require disturbance of the soil and replanting every year, and not allowing a healthy root-supported ecosystem to develop in the soil that, as Wes Jackson had been arguing, had what was causing, it was at the root of, so to speak, of pretty much all of the problems of agriculture, such as soil erosion, water pollution, etc. So I decided to come over here to the Land Institute to work on development of perennial counterparts of our annual grain crops, including perennial wheat, perennial sorghum, perennial sunflower, and other crops like that. So because I'm a plant breeder, but in the past couple of years, I've handed the perennial sorghum breeding over and to others, and have come into ecosphere studies.
Thank you, Stan. Just a follow-up question. What are ecosphere studies?
Well, we're pursuing the questions of ecological limits, which so far our governments and economies totally ignore. What have come to be called planetary boundaries. And as a result, humanity is overshooting all of these boundaries. Climate, greenhouse warming being, of course, one of the most prominent. We've already used up our so-called carbon budget, and we're going into arrears on that. But there's also our disruption of the world's nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, and probably most importantly of all, the rapid accelerating loss of biodiversity and species extinction. And then there are others like freshwater and so forth. We're studying how we can create a society that pulls back within those limits. It sets its own limits, pulls back within those, and reverses this damage, and advocating for ways to get to that.
Thank you. Actually, Chris, who had the hand raised and I couldn't get her or him unmuted, just typed the question. I'm wondering how you see rationing of carbon targets playing out internationally, deferring historic responsibilities for emissions.
Yeah, this is an important question that has been, I think, the one of the movements making the most progress on this is the push for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which is modeled on the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which was first, it originated in the 1960s, and eventually every country in the world has signed on to it. And it has been pretty successful in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And whereas the weapons treaty banned the development of nuclear weapons in countries that didn't have them already, this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty would have each country have to eliminate its fossil fuel use on a schedule adapted to that country. And whereas the fossil fuel or the nuclear treaty provided as kind of compensation for countries not being able to develop weapons, it helped fund and promote the development of the peaceful use of nuclear energy, which is kind of an oxymoron these days, but they helped countries develop nuclear powered electricity. The fossil fuel treaty would have the countries of the global north provide large amounts of funding to energy poor countries and countries that cannot afford to transition away from fossil fuels on their own, and to ensure that all countries have clean energy. And that part of it they've been discussing at the Glasgow summit on this transfer of money from the north to the south. But this this treaty, of course, is kind of a aspirational thing, and we don't have time for to get all of the countries in the world to sign on to such a thing, much less to actually pursue it, or to wait until that for them to pursue it. So individual countries are going to have to, especially the high emitters and the more affluent of countries that can afford to, are going to have to jump first and start doing this. And that's why we've been advocating this cap and adapt system as a way that countries, and I think this country should lead the way, should set an example, and maybe even form alliances with other nearby countries or other countries, and kind of have mini treaties, that mini treaties that could eventually coalesce into a worldwide thing.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Please raise your hand or type into the chat. So in the meantime, a little bit about your book also, Stan. As you connected the solutions that you lined out in your last book about, that go along with the Green New Deal or surpass it and go further than the Green New Deal. How did you incorporate the lessons learned from the pandemic and also from systemic racism that occurred in the last couple of years and brought our understanding that they are complex systems, that they belong together?
Yeah, yes, that is the lesson of the past couple of years here, is that it's no longer a case of tackling these issues one by one, that their roots are so intertangled that it all needs to be considered together. And the problem is that and ever since the economy crashed, all of the effort of the government has been on restoring the rate of growth that we had in 2018-19, and not really changing the structure of the economy, not doing something about the huge distortions in economic power in this country. And in fact, during the pandemic, we've all seen that the richest 600 something people gained something like $1 trillion in wealth, more than they had ever accumulated, whereas more people fell into poverty and food insecurity than reversed many decades of improvement in poverty. So the distortions even got bigger. But meanwhile, one of the things that prompted writing the book, which I started in late summer of 2020, was the way in which the Black Lives Matter movement managed to focus the country's attention, to rivet it on one of the most serious problems that we have, and so between what they did, as I was saying, in previous decades, the accomplishments of the environmental justice movement, and the continuing efforts of Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, etc. And interestingly, now we're seeing in the more recent part of the pandemic, a new awareness of workers' rights and workers actually gaining power and once again having the ability to organize and kind of flexing their muscles in the struggle with big business. So all of these developments may mean that in the end, despite all the failures and disappointments of trying to deal with the pandemic and climate, that maybe there are some ways forward, and But we all, those of us working on all of these different issues, have to work together.
Thank you, Stan. Let me quickly double check. We have no new questions here. Guys, it's your chance to ask Stan Cox a question. So, last call. Okay, good. So then thank you very much, Stan, for presenting for us and answering our questions. And as I wrote in the announcement, the Shoe Bookshop has some copies of Stan's book if you want to read up on things we didn't get through in the shortness of time. And details are also published on the sustainability website. Okay, thanks a lot again, Stan, and keep up the good work. I will for sure follow your writings in the future.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everyone for participating. This has been fun. Thanks.
Good. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah.